On this week's episode of Australian Survivor Talking Tribal, George and Hayley talk to us about the emotional and physical impact of being 2 weeks into the game.
You're being hit with these really physical challenges and the elements can really start to get to you.
We talk about Queen Sandra's big move, and on this edition of World of Survivor, we talk about twists and tribe swaps and just how to survive them.
I really enjoyed the way that this non-elimination episode was done.
As well as that, George talks with one of our eliminated contestants. Welcome to the show, everyone. This is Australian Survivor Talking Tribal, the show where we dive in, dissect, pull apart what we've seen all through the week on Australian Survivor. A whole heap to talk about, a lot of twists, a lot of surprises. But before we get into it, got to tell you, if you haven't seen these week's episodes, this is your chance to stop and catch up because there's spoilers akimbo. We're going to be talking about episodes 4, 5, and 6. So just head to 10 Play on demand and you can catch all those eps on Survivor. But for those of you who have watched, welcome, and also welcome to our panel. This week, of course, we're joined by a Survivor expert and podcast extraordinaire, Shannon Gus. From last year's season of Australian Survivor, the king of Bankstown, George himself, and as always, the reigning sole survivor, rounds out our panel, Hayley. Welcome, guys. Great to have you on board. We might find out from you your first reactions. Who was your favourite player of the week and what was your biggest highlight?
Hey, James. It has been an epic week and there's been lots of big players coming out. My favourite player this week has been Sam Gash. She started off the week having just put a vote on Sandra, but somehow she shifted the blame for that onto Dave and made him a target. So that has been really interesting to see her get away with. And she's managed to make some big moves that stay in the middle each time and really held herself in a nice spot. When we saw Sophie get voted out, Sam could have had a target coming onto her, but she's now shifted that job off to Mark to then have to deal with, and she's eyes on the prize. So Sam Gash, definitely my player of the week. My favourite moment of this week is actually a challenge moment. I'm a big fan of strategy, but this week I was blown away by Benny in that immunity challenge. He put out this massive effort. He held that log for the entirety of the tribe. I was on the edge of my seat. I was screaming, hold on, and he managed to win immunity for them. And that was my epic moment of the week.
I think my favourite moment of the week was just having the privilege of watching and listening to Queen Sandra outline her thoughts in detail on how to navigate this early part of Australian Survivor, when she's referring to herself as the American eagle, just hovering above and swooping at these rookies. I'm just reveling in her presence. Queen Sandra's been phenomenal. Sam Gash, I agree with you, is playing an extraordinary game so far. And just overall, I am just loving this season of Australian Survivor so far.
Yeah, I would agree. My player of the week would be Sandra. And my moment of the week, I mean, it's several moments. It's a whole sequence through the week of just watching Sandra slice and dice through the game. I feel like the running theme of the week was people telling us that they had secret alliances and then Sandra telling us that she knew about those secret alliances. So her awareness is second to none probably in the entire global franchise. And just watching her slice the tribe basically into voting blocks by the end and give her faction just the most dominant power by going for one side in the Alpha Alliance, and then when they were defanged by Sophie being taken out, to go for another side because at that point she could make two more less threatening factions. I just thought that she was amazing, and as George said, it's just a privilege to watch the Queen work her magic.
So we're on to our second week of being in the Outback. Hayley and George, you know better than anyone the emotional and physical toll that it takes. What would the contestants be going through right now, and where were you guys at this stage?
Look, as someone that is not an athlete, it's really tough out there. And then you have the even greater kind of mix of not having experience of living in the outdoors. But right now, you really start to determine 2 weeks in who is focused on the game and who is willing to do what it takes for the game to survive. You really have to push through the physical elements. You have to manage your energy. You have to manage your thoughts. You have to manage your internal resources and allocate them to perfection. Otherwise, your body's going to break down. And we saw that happen this week.
Yeah, the week 2 of Survivor starts getting really tough because at the start you've got this adrenaline, you've got some body stores because you've been stuffing your face with food before you went to the game. And in the second week, that all starts to deplete. So you really start feeling a lot more tired. You're being hit with these really physical challenges and you're being knocked about by those. And the elements can really start to get to you. You might start getting really sunburnt, really dry lips. Mosquitoes might be biting. That can start to compound and can make your sleep worse. And if your sleep is worse, your brain's not working so well, and you might make mistakes strategically. So it's starting to get really tough for them out there.
Right. With that in mind, how hard is it to be in that environment, be drained physically and mentally, and then jump into an endurance challenge like we saw this week?
Yeah, James, you nailed it there. It is the mental strength. So your brain is telling you, stop, let go, this is painful, but you need to have full concentration on nothing but the idea of hold on, breathe, hold on, I can do it. So you have to keep self-reaffirming that you can do it. It's just adrenaline. Like, it is pure adrenaline out there. You could be dragging your feet to get yourself to a challenge. You might have not won any rewards or had barely any food, but the minute they say go, just something takes over, and it is just pure adrenaline to win at all costs, even if you're expelling a lot of energy for a glass of juice.
Obviously, food's a big part of the game, and Khan has taken up the role of campfire chef. We've seen him whip up some Survivor tacos. That was a first. Were you guys impressed with that?
Yeah, I think this might have been the most impressive thing I've seen. I don't know how, from the ingredients they had. I'm not much of a cook myself, but I don't know how he formed that. Obviously, as a master chef, that's something that he should be able to do. But I think strategically, as a chef, it can go either way. We've seen famously in Australia, the Australian outback, Keith Famey was a chef, and people weren't that impressed with what he was kind of cooking up, literally. And then, yes, being the chef can be an integral role that people don't want to lose, and it can keep you around. So I think Khan is probably managing that pretty well. Maybe some other parts of his personality, like he's so charismatic, or maybe a little too threatening. But I think as the chef, whipping up some incredible tacos, he might be long for the game just on that.
I know you guys have mentioned maybe some arancini balls might be something you'd like to see. They've only got beans and rice, basically, and a bit of fish. But what else would you love to see on the Survivor menu?
Well, look, I was just happy to have anything. Just a tiny sprinkle of rice and beans would have done for me. But I think there is a huge value in having that kind of morale booster of something different happening. And when you're such a skilled master chef like Khan most literally is, it is a huge kind of like strategic benefit to bring that aspect of his real world into the Survivor world. What would I have liked to have eaten? Some kind of crispy rice patty with a lentil burger. That would have been fantastic. But unfortunately, we didn't have an immunity pin winning master chef on our Brains tribe, did we, Hayley?
No, that would have been amazing to have Khan there. Khan, if you're listening, what I would love for you to be cooking out there in Survivor, I want Survivor paella. I think we can do it. You've got the rice, maybe some mussels, some fish from that river, bit of bush herbs. Survivor paella would be what I'd be asking for in my menu.
I love everyone getting their orders in for the returning season. Just like, all right, when we're all out there again, I just want to write it down, prepare it now, because this is what I'll be expecting out there.
All right, we've got a heap to get into as we explore this week's episode, including Sandra's big move this week. We're also going to explore in the world of Survivor and George's exclusive chat with this week's eliminated contestant. All that and more when we come back right here on Australian Survivor Talking Tribal. All right, thanks for sticking with us here on Australian Survivor Talking Tribal. Let's get into the meat of it, though, talk eliminations. Now, Sam found herself in a bit of a predicament this week. We watched in Ep 4, I think it was. She had to make a big choice between staying loyal and getting rid of a potential threat. Shannon, how do you think she played that?
I thought that she made a really good decision. I mean, it felt like obviously a more active flip because she's much closer to Sophie, actually has an actively negative relationship with David at this point, and David is the presumptive vote. So she's like making the move there with Jessie. But I wanted to point out a couple of things about Sam's position in the game. The first being that they don't need her vote. They know how hard it's going to be for her to vote out Sophie, and she's the seventh of 11. They only need six. But they still want her vote and they go to her with that. And she's clearly a tight pair with Jessie, who's just so well connected that she has to be part of the plan. So just to even have the decision to make, I think is really speaks to her social game and where she's at in the tribe. So I think they made a good, strong move. She can rally through that. She's still super well connected through the game. And even knowing that there could be a twist, she knows she's got Mark on the other side to back her up. And she's, really confident in her position in the game. And I think as well, like, why should Sam accept being low in a hierarchy when she is so social, so socially connected to the point where she can be really high in the hierarchy? Like, you have to think about it when you're playing the game from other people's perspective. If you're Sophie, it makes a lot of sense to have this tight four, but then also some auxiliary relationships with a Sam. And I think she was going to be loyal to Sam in that way. For her, that's a perfect situation. But if she's thinking about it from Sam's perspective, why would Sam want to be just basically Sophie's side character, Sophie's number in what Sam sees and every player sees as their own story? So I think it makes a lot of sense to flip on what at that point was a minority alliance. A transparent, strong minority alliance is going to get targeted.
And the fact that both alliances are trying to pull Sam in speaks volumes to her social game right now. So it's quite good.
Shannon, can you talk a little bit about Sophie's game so far? She herself thought that she was being quite low-key. Obviously, she's a big personality, but in her book, she was pulling things back a little bit. But Sandra disagreed. She thought she was trying to be a leader too much. How do you think about her gameplay so far, knowing that she's tried to meter herself a little bit?
Yeah, hard to go toe-to-toe with the queen who has such great awareness. She's not even the only person in this very week who will fall victim to the fact that Sandra has some sort of superpowers where she can see what you're doing no matter how subtle you think that you're being.
I think one of the difficult things for Sophie is she's been trying to mitigate her position in the real world where she's an extremely successful business person that gives directions to people. And from her perspective, she was doing that well. But when you're out there, when you're starving in the outback over 2.5 or 2 and a bit weeks, your true colours come out. So Sophie is someone that cobbled together the big, strong boys who were essentially doing as they were told by Sophie. And you had both Sam and Sandra point that out from different perspectives and use that to paint a target on Sophie's back. And she felt it at that tribal council.
Hayley, what are your thoughts on that? If someone is creating too much drama or too much havoc in the camp, do they need to go, or is it handy to keep them around because they're going to be rubbing people up the wrong way?
Look, it depends. If someone is causing a stir at camp, then that might be okay for your game. As long as their guns aren't pointed at you, then that's fine. But in this case, if I'm Sam, Sophie is particularly upset with Sam, feels really heartbroken by the loss of what she thought was a strong trust. So if I'm Sam and someone is there saying, "You've really upset me," well, then I'm probably not going to want to keep them around because I would imagine at some point they're going to want revenge. So from Sam's perspective, absolutely. She wouldn't want to keep Sophie around after she has been voted out. And yeah, that's how I would approach it as well.
It feels like everyone's woken up a little bit to the fact that Khan is a serious player. What did you make of KJ's tactics to try and get rid of the threat?
I think KJ is absolutely spot on, and she's somebody that has been gathering information slowly, and disseminating it within her tribe. Yes, she got Sophie, her younger sister, coming there with a big target on her back, but she also has started laying the groundwork for the future vote off of King Khan. Khan is someone who has the hidden immunity idol, or a public idol, as everybody knows about it. He has a social bond. He's providing everybody with food, and everybody likes him. Now's the time for KJ to start that disinformation and propaganda campaign that Khan's a potential winner and a threat, and it sets him up to take him down.
I think Khan as well is a rare player where you can actually see the charisma coming through the screen. Sometimes it's really hard to translate how someone might be coming across with people, but Khan is just like you feel the energy and the presence and the humor and pretty much everything he says. He's always on, and I feel that I can tell why he is such a huge threat. There, of course, is the idol, but everyone is onto the fact that he is the kind of player who could win because he has that charisma, he has that social game, he's clearly thinking super smart. And now everyone's onto it. Even Mark, who we made the relationship with last week. I'm very much here for King Kong versus King Khan. It's harder to say than it is maybe to watch. It's great to watch. So I'm here for the battle. I think it will be playing out pretty soon. And I really like both of those players. So I would like for it to kind of go well somehow where we don't lose them. But I think it could get pretty brutal there.
As George mentioned, there's some idols in play. There's a couple we know about, and everyone seems to know about them. Hayley, how important is it to try and flush out an idol this early on? Is it top of mind, or is it only later in the game that you think, okay, this is a real problem?
Look, it's easier to flush out idols when there's more numbers in the game that you can work with. As we get down the line and there are less players, it's harder to split these votes. So, look, if you feel confident enough in your big majority that you can split a vote, then that's great. We are only in week 2, so people are, starting to feel more comfortable in their alliances so that they could do that. It is pretty threatening to know someone has an idol, and sometimes it might be better for them to just play it and get it off their back.
Of course, then we saw the next reward challenge, see the 2 tribes get to catch up, share a meal. It was very emotional for some of them. It was explosive for others. Do you think this was going to be advantageous for everyone?
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic to see the 2 tribes come together at this point. I think for someone like Sam, it can be really useful because she's just tried to go for Sophie, but Sophie is still here. And that's really dangerous for Sam's game. So it gives her a chance to talk to Mark and tell him, rally the troops. It's time to get Sophie out. You need to do it. It's interesting to see Sophie's approach here. If people know that you're against them, you give them no reason to keep you around. So maybe a better approach would have been something like what we see David do when he comes back and just humbles himself to his tribe and says, whoops, that was my fault. I made a mistake. Oh my God, bad. And kind of then he looks less threatening and he's going to work with you. So it'll be interesting to see what happens going forward now with some enemies in camp.
Yeah, and in a game where you're trying to manage your threat level the whole time, the best thing about being voted out but not actually going home is that you've just had your threat level completely cut and reduced. So obviously the thing to do is to lean into that, be a little bit self-deprecating about that, either with blood when you're reconnected in that summit or with water, and obviously not like vocally confront people. But that's why Survivor is such a fun game, because the chess move is to put it on you and not blame others. And the emotional thing is like, I'm really hurt by this and I'm going to express that. So I thought that was a really interesting moment. And I loved that summit and that communication there. But I also really enjoyed, before they knew they were going to be able to actively talk, just all the kind of desperate communication between them to take out Sophie, and Sandra literally making like a throat slit motion to Nina was probably like my favorite moment of the week, because that's the queen and princess going like literally out for blood, and it was like there in the motion.
Of course, with that twist at Tribal Council, we saw for the first time a pair of loved ones playing alongside each other. Sophie was with KJ. Do you think this is a positive or negative for these guys, especially KJ? He seems a little concerned about what impact it'll have on her game.
Look, she still went to bat for Sophie, and I'm sure we'll talk about her plan, which I thought there was a lot of really great stuff around. But I don't think that them being a pair, and as Khan even says to KJ, like, I don't think that is threatening. It would be a little bit hypocritical to vote someone out for being a pair. You don't know if at a swap you might be in the same situation. So I don't know that anyone with a loved one still in the game, just pretty much everyone, can really do that. But I do understand that just from a personality perspective, like, if Sophie alienates KJ's allies, are they going to want to work with KJ? So it's more of a personal thing for me. And I think that at a point, Sophie kind of hung back and let KJ take the strategic lead. But when she's kind of, complaining about Sam to Mark or yelling at Sam or Jordan. Like, there are loved ones involved in that are on KJ and Sophie's tribe. So I definitely understand why KJ was a bit distressed by this. But then like, again, it's that older big sister thing where she has to kind of go to bat for her and be protective. So that's why blood versus water is such an interesting theme, because it's maybe more logical to sacrifice Sophie at that point, but it's just not something that KJ is really going to be able to do, and she's going to go to bat for her strategically.
Of course, KJ talks about that after the reward.
Sophie has come in here, all guns blazing, she could potentially blow up my game.
She's not actually realising it's affecting me on a personal level, and it's affecting me on a relationship level.
Yeah, well, yeah, definitely. Yeah, I get that. So tell her.
So just focus on what's ahead. Like, we can't change what's happened. It's done, and it's going to happen to other people.
She's got a real point there. What do you guys feel about how Sophie's actions might impact KJ's game, which has been pretty smart so far?
I was incredibly impressed by KJ this week. So KJ is someone that has been playing quite a perfect Survivor game. She's found herself in a majority alliance, and then her emotional younger sister, who she's probably looked out for her entire life, has just joined the tribe in all of this huff and puff. And she's self-aware enough to realize that that could jeopardize her position in the game. What will be critical for KJ moving forward is how she manages her own sister, and whether that is a benefit or a detriment to her game, and whether she has it in her to actually sever the cord so she can make it to the end game.
And we hear as well that they're polar opposites. You know, they're fire and ice. They are like blood and water, the way that Sophie's super emotional and KJ has to come through with logic. And I also thought she played really well. It's unfortunate that we didn't get to see how the plan played out because Alex had to leave. But I thought it was a really, really cool plan with a lot of numerical nuance that with the 5-3-3, she gave a lot of benefit to people who really wanted to vote Sophie out. And she gave this other option, which is like, Sophie might still go. We can use her as a distraction. We can use her as bait. We can kind of put her in the firing line so that no one else would have to suffer. And we get the opportunity to flush 2 idols when people seem really scared of idols. And then she has to work hard to try and have Khan not realize it so that Sophie doesn't go home. I don't know that they would have pulled it off, but she gave Sophie a fighting chance when she really shouldn't have even had that chance. So again, when we have that emotion and logic, she came in through with some real extreme numerical logic there with the plan. And I thought that it was really, really savvy.
George, let's talk about Alex quickly. Obviously, he wasn't in great physical health there, really struggling with his back. What did you make of his decision to ask the tribe to vote him out?
I think it was a really kind of brave and emotional decision, because my biggest fear going out there was suffering an injury and needing to be medevaced. And Alex has clearly been suffering with pain, and Hayley's the pain expert, and I'm sure she has some particular thoughts on this, but he's been suffering in pain with his back injury for so long, and he's made that brave decision to leave the game.
Yeah, I have a lot of empathy for Alex in this position he's in. You know, he started the game, all he did was bend over, and he started to have some spasms and pain in his back. It's not uncommon that can happen, but when you have pain in your back, there is no position that you can move in. You can't even breathe without that hurting. And it's really hard because pain is invisible to empathize when someone who's young and fit and is still performing in challenges is suffering all the time, every day, every night for this long. So the fact that he stayed in that long when he had suffered his injury so early is super commendable. The fact that he pushed himself so hard in those challenges, he was one of the last 2 left in that immunity challenge, incredibly commendable. And, you know, if it's affecting you so severely and emotionally, pain affects you so badly that you have to leave the game, then unfortunately, so be it.
And it's really just so unfortunate for so many reasons, obviously, for anyone to leave the game under those circumstances. But the Water Tribe just loved Alex. I mean, we talk about some of these couples. I say, you know, find you someone who looks at you like the Water Tribe was looking at Alex. They just like desperately did not want him to go home. Even when he wanted it, they wouldn't let him go out of the game. They refused to vote him out. And I know there was other stuff in there and other things they were trying to do with taking out enemies or threats and flashing idols, but they just really, really loved him. And I think that had he been able to physically manage it, he could have gone really, really far. So just really, really hard to see anyone leave the game like that.
All right, all amazing points. We've got to take a quick break right here on Australian Survivor Talking Tribal. Coming up, we'll chat about Sandra's big move this week. We're also going to explore in the world of Survivor, the world of twists and tribe swaps, how they've played out over the years. And George once again chats to one of this week's eliminated contestants. Welcome back to Australian Survivor Talking Tribal. Now, each week on the show, we do this segment we like to call World of Survivor with Shannon. Of course, Shannon's our resident expert. And this week on the World of Survivor, we're talking about twists. Now, the twist that threw a spanner in the work this week, of course, was the tribe swap. Tell us a little bit about that and how they've played out over the years, Shannon.
If I'm going to say some of my favorite individual tribe swaps over the years, I actually think that this one might be up there. I really enjoyed the way that this non-elimination episode was done. We've seen individual tribe swaps or just a couple of people swapping tribes throughout Australian Survivor history in these non-eliminations. And I often find it a bit unfair because what happens is someone gets voted out, they go to a tribe of opponents to the people who just voted them out, and they all kind of revel in the fact that they hate those people, and that person is brought in with open arms, often to the detriment of the people who had that successful vote, who should be rewarded for it. A really good example of that is Tara and Annalise going to Asanga in Australian Survivor 2017, and a player like AK who led that vote, and who had no idea that that vote was going to happen. It was just a regular tribal council. He didn't know that that save was going to happen, and he suffered for it to the point where he actually got voted out because of it when the tribe swapped. So I think what makes this really interesting is how it interacts with the blood versus water dynamic. Sophie isn't going to a group that can all kind of hate on the people who voted her out together. She's going to loved ones who can back up those players who did make that vote so that they're more supported in that. She has a much, much harder battle in front of her in going to that group. So she suffers for that, which you should if you get voted out. So she's still in the game, but with that hardship that you should have if you've been saved by a twist. As well, I also really found it fun to see her reconnect with KJ, see the difference in relationships when you're on the same beach together, and also just to kind of see that emotion. And she had a very dramatic reaction to it with all the cross-tribal stuff that really played out in interesting and entertaining ways. So I love the way that this non-elimination was done.
Now, obviously, you've got to know something big or different is going to happen when the other tribe is invited to tribal, surely.
Yeah, that's a really good indication that tonight is not going to go as you maybe planned ever since Australian Survivor 2016 in the very early days when two tribes went to tribal council and then just voted other people to the other tribe instead. And there's been lots of different ways that another tribe there has kind of interacted with the vote, whether it's two tribes going to tribal council and people who want to challenge deciding who goes, the eliminated contestants making fire, a save or send mechanism. There are definitely ways to read that this is going to be a non-elimination episode. But at the same time, it can be difficult. In George and Haley's season, for example, in that first tribal council with 6 people getting sent out, you might think, okay, this is like a massive thing. That person's going to be saved. And Phil wasn't. So it becomes dangerous when you're trying to read production and hinging your game on that. And that's something I know that Haley has spoken about in the Baden vote from her season. Yes, 3 people were voting and then 1 person was voting. It seemed like maybe there'd be a save mechanic. But then what if there isn't? Or what if that save mechanic doesn't benefit you?
What the survivor gods throw at you, you can never particularly expect. But even when a twist happens, the point of the game is who is able to change and adapt their strategy to work around that to their benefit. So I was kept on my toes. I had multiple plans available, and that worked for me. And then Haley, to her credit, part of the reason why she won the crown of sole survivor is when she came back from her twist, she had a change of tact, and it worked. What's going to separate the good from the bad players in blood versus water is who can adapt the best and then execute their plans again.
Yeah, it's easy from the couch to say, oh, obviously there's going to be a twist, but it's not always obvious when you're out there. And, as Shannon has said, like the twist might not be what you think it is. Just because it's happened in a previous season doesn't mean they're going to do that again. But yeah, so this was an interesting way to do a keep someone in the game twist.
At that reward challenge, Sophie expressed that, she now has the power to vote out the loved ones of the people that betrayed her. Do you think that was a clever idea to articulate?
Frankly, I think she just misread the room.
Yeah, I think in a regular season, that's, often true. It's like, I'm going to come in with some power here. Even as an outsider, And if we swap, for example, I'll have allies to take you out. Kara did literally do that in the last season. The people that voted her out, when she swapped back with Braun, she had the power to take out all of those brains that she wanted to. That is often the dynamic. But I think the blood versus water element here makes it really, really tricky to her. And as I think Sam pointed out, like if there's a majority of bloods who voted you out, then their loved ones are a majority now on your new tribe. And we can get them to vote you out as well, which I guess we'll see how that plays out. So tricky spot for Sophie. She gets a second chance at the game, but she's absolutely not home on just that chance.
And we saw at that tribal, the colour just drain from Sam's face when she found out that Soph, who'd just been eliminated, was actually coming back to the game. George, you've got a bit of experience in that field. What's that sensation like, or what goes through your mind when you see someone who you thought was no longer in the game return?
I think the difficult thing with Survivor is you can't always predict what's going to happen. And there's no doubt that Sam Gash looked like an absolute ghost at that tribal council. But that's why I like the element of surprise. I would have preferred it if Sophie just walked down the path and then popped her head at the next day's reward challenge, and then everybody had the shock of their life there. It gives people less time to react. It keeps people on their toes. And the real test of character comes out when people have to adapt really, really quickly.
We did see Sophie and Sam take each other on at the challenge after Sophie came back. And that was scary because Sophie was either going to settle her score in a vote out, or she was going to do it in a battle at a challenge. And she certainly did. When she threw that big punch at Sam and knocked her out, I was terrified for Sam. So to see Sam then end up small, tiny Sam push her off the edge was pretty thrilling to watch.
Hayley, can you talk about your own personal experience getting voted out? What was the mindset shift after that? And how long did you have to sort of process that and change how you were going to attack the game?
Yeah, so when I was voted out, I went to Redemption Rock. So I had about 24 hours to process those emotions. And I feel like they were quite different. So my emotions were really embarrassment at having been voted out. What mistake did I make that led me to this path where my whole tribe has now voted me out? And how can I rectify that when I come back in? So when I came back in, I really had some humility. I had ready to correct my ways, ready to lower my threat level. Whereas what we see with Sophie is she's upset and angry, and that's a totally justified feeling to have. But then she pulls that back out onto everybody else. Instead of kind of stepping back and being like, all right, so I did something that made me threatening and now I'm going to change that. So because we don't see this correction, it'll be interesting to see what the pathway is now, and to see if she has learned anything from that experience of being voted out.
I've got my own redemption rock in the backyard for when things get heated at home. Still to come on Australian Survivor Talking Tribal. George, you catch up with one of this week's eliminated contestants. Welcome back to Australian Survivor Talking Tribal. Let's check in with George now, who was lucky enough to catch up with Jay, our most recently eliminated Survivor contestant.
Jay, it's great to have you here on Australian Survivor Talking Tribal. The first question I'd like to ask you is, what drew you to Australian Survivor?
Do you know the honest truth? And I'm not just saying this. I actually watched last season, and for some reason I was fascinated with you. So I think that got me hooked on last season, but I hadn't watched previous season. But obviously it's competitive. You're in the outback. You've got no phone. Melbourne was going into lockdown. And I just thought, get me out of here.
Did you have a favourite time or favourite moment while you were out there?
I think my favourite moment was probably every time I got into the water, or the hammock, or eating, or when we had a croissant and coffee reward. That was easily one of my favourite times. I was mixing milk, sugar, and jam, and I made a paste. So that was probably my favourite time there.
And what was the hardest thing about playing Australian Survivor for you?
Our sleeping arrangement, as you'd know, we slept in a line, in a Congo line. So we'd spoon one way and then it'd start, like dominoes down the end. Someone would elbow and then we'd all spoon the other way. So if you were dead asleep, finally, you'd get an elbow and you'd have to move back this way. So I'd say the sleep deprivation, that got hard. And I was next to the fire, so I was roasting some nights at 3 a.m. and like everyone else was freezing. So I think the sleeping was the hardest.
Let's talk about the tribal council where you were voted off. It was a huge blindside. How did you feel about that blindside?
It was a blindside. I started to feel pretty comfortable. Like I said, I felt like I had Amy, Dave, Jesse, Sam, and myself. I felt Sandra were more on our alliance rather than the Alpha Alliance. And I mean, Amy had an idol that shook things up. I think when your partner goes, you become really vulnerable. So, Andy left, Kate leaves, Brianna leaves, Dave gets voted but has an idol, Alex leaves, I leave. There feels like there's a pattern. So whoever breaks that pattern, I think will go far.
And if you take yourself back, when you got back into camp from the immunity challenge, is there anything you think you could have done differently in that scramble before you walked to the tribal council?
Absolutely. I was way too comfortable and I felt safe. I actually felt safe and secure. I watched your season and you said every day you feel like the pressure's on you. And I reckon that puts you in an aggressive mindset or fight or flight. I was not in fight or flight. I was sitting on a hammock thinking, Dave's the chance to go home. Let's save Dave. And that's all I thought. So I probably could have scrambled a bit more and spoke to Sandra.
Speaking of Sandra, who do you think is the biggest threat right now? Is it her or is there anyone else we should keep an eye on for?
I definitely don't think Sandra is the biggest threat. I think I guess this is why she's so good. You don't feel like she's a threat and she just, like she said, she picks you off one by one. I reckon Jordan from Blue Tribe, Mark, big threat, and I'd say Chrissy and Shay.
Cool. Well, Jay, thanks so much for joining us. It was great watching you play Australian Survivor, and hopefully we get to see you around soon.
Hopefully I'll see you at the next soccer game.
I love watching the football on Channel 10.
Thanks, George.
There you go. Interesting to see what Jay had to say about his experience on Australian Survivor. So Sandra, Khan, Soph, all emerging as threats, but they've all managed to make their way through to the next week. Hayley, out of those guys, who do you think is going to go the furthest? What are you expecting to see?
Oh, tough. I just want Sandra to stay on my screen as long as I can. I love watching her play. I love watching her adapt her game to the Australians. And I love watching her hit it in the challenges. She's staying not very close to the bench. She is giving it her all. So I want to see Sandra go the longest out of those three.
Yeah, I actually do think that Sandra will make it the furthest of those three because they've been saved in different ways this week, but those ways really are polar opposites. I mean, Sophie's mostly through mechanisms of the game, Alex possibly having to leave. So that really is, she's being saved by the game itself. Khan was possibly saved by the things. Then he has an idol, so he has trinkets to save him, and that's to his credit as well, to kind of have these superpowers in the game. But I think that he's really kind of on his last line of defenses, whereas Sandra is saving herself without kind of any of those game mechanics. It's pure awareness, socializing, and politicking, and that's the kind of stuff that you always have. Even if an idol gets flushed, you kind of always have your wits about you. So based on what they kind of have to protect them, and how much luck is involved in kind of all of those circumstances, I think Sandra is the most long for the game.
What I want to see next week is Sophie adapt her style of gameplay. Sophie has an opportunity here. She's still in the game. Yes, she's been saved by a twist. Yes, she's been saved by a withdrawal, but she has the opportunity to readjust, pivot, and focus on what matters and winning that crown of sole survivor. So I'm hoping that Sophie can turn it around. Aside from that, both Khan and Sandra are playing excellently, and long may it continue.
That's all coming up on the next episode of Australian Survivor Blood versus Water. Of course, you can catch it Sunday night, 7:30 on 10 or on 10 Play on demand as well. And a new episode of this show Australian Survivor Talking Tribal is going to drop straight after episode 9. But if you're watching this, obviously you're a big fan and you're mad for the show, and you probably want to stick around for this very exclusive sneak peek of episode 7.
Drop your buffs. We are switching things up. All right, here we go. 1 buff each. One of them is empty. Do not panic if you get that one. Let's see how this is going to play out. Everyone, open your buffs.